So, hello and a very warm welcome to our session today. Today's session is our fireside chat, which will focus on how journalism is dealing with the digital turn and some of the other contemporary issues impacting journalism today, especially from an Indian perspective. We are very delighted to welcome our guest for today's session, Ms. Palki Sharma. Ms. Sharma is one of the foremost journalists in India. She has over 20 years of experience. I would request Deepti if you can share the slides, please. Thank you, Deepti. Just move to the next slide. Yeah. So Ms. Sharma is one of the foremost journalists in India with over 20 years of experience, having worked with big media houses like Network 18, Z Media, Vion, Doordarshan, and Hindustan Times. Currently, she is the managing editor at First Post, part of the Network 18 group, wherein she leads and hosts the show Vantage, a show that promises news without spin and sensationalism, and also brings to fore India's take on the world for global audiences. Move to the next slide. Our moderator for today's session is Dr. Taneja. So Dr. Taneja is an associate professor in the College of Media at University of Illinois. He's also the program mentor for journalism program at Jio Institute. His research focuses on explaining audience behaviors in an increasingly fragmented digital media environment. Prior to joining academia, he has worked in media and advertising at Publicis, BBC, and the Indian Express. Next slide. So today's session, it's part of an online series, which we are calling First in Media. It's a fireside chat series with India's leading journalists organized by the journalism program of Jio Institute. Next slide. So a little about ourselves. So Jio Institute is a multidisciplinary higher education institute set up as a philanthropic initiative by Reliance Foundation and Reliance Industries. Currently, they are offering admissions in 4 full-time programs, PGP in Artificial Intelligence and Data Science, PGP in Digital Media and Marketing Communication, PGP in Sports Management, and PGP in Journalism program. Next. So this is a small view, aerial view of our campus. We are located in Navi Mumbai, overseeing the sea, and this is the look of the campus. Next slide. A little about our program. So the postgraduate program in journalism, it's a 1-year full-time on-campus program. We have global faculty and a state-of-the-art infrastructure, a futuristic curriculum with study abroad module, multiple industry projects and internships as part of the curriculum, generous scholarships and financial aid to meritorious candidates, and a 360-degree career support. Our admissions are closing on 30th May 2023. So if anybody is interested or anyone in your network is interested, please do feel free to share with them. As part of our journalism program, we have been in touch with multiple organizations and entities to enhance our industry connect. This industry connect helps us in terms of our internships, our thesis projects, and co-curricular initiatives like the lecture series, student club activities, in addition to obviously placements. Thank you, Deepti. You can now stop sharing the presentation. Okay. So before we begin the masterclass today, I would like to point to our audience that they can add their questions in the comment section below. We shall take the questions towards the end of the session. Without further ado, I would request Dr. Taneja to begin today's session. Over to you, sir.
Okay. Thank you so much, Harshita. I hope I'm audible clearly.
Yes, you are.
Okay, that's very good. So, a very good evening to all those of you who are in India, and it's a really fine but chilly spring morning in Chicago. So I'm extremely privileged and delighted to be able to have this conversation with Palki Sharma today. If I may, I'll just address you by first name in the rest of this session, Palki. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this for us at a very short notice. And, as you can try to see, we are trying to sort of create a very carefully thought through journalism program here at Jio Institute, and having the support of, stalwarts from the industry like you is one of the key components. So this will be a very freewheeling conversation, as you call it, a fireside chat. So it really will be a chat, and initially Palki and I will do a lot of the talking, but we would encourage any and all questions so that we make it as inclusive as we can in these formats, So let's start this chat with a very, very, very basic question, something that maybe a lot of us already think we know the answer to, but it would be great to have the version of, someone who's been in the industry. So my very simple question is, why do the news media and journalism matter in society? And I'll just put more context. So imagine we had somebody from another planet where there was no concept of, news and journalism. And if we had to tell them that there is something called news, and it's a very important feature of our society, how would you explain that?
Very interesting question. Let me start by thanking you, Harsh, and Jio Institute for having me here. And I always look forward to these conversations because they also give us a chance to reflect on what we're doing and where we are and where we're going. Because in the very, very busy world of daily news, you're sort of like on a treadmill all the time, and you don't really get the time to sit back and reflect on the process and the progress and the path that we are on. So I hope to take this opportunity to, through you and through your questions, also relook at what I'm doing. Why does journalism matter, and what would I tell an alien? Uh, Journalism matters because I've said this before, our world runs on stories. We grow up listening to stories of how we came into being, gods, kings, queens, kingdoms, animals. And the stories inspire us, they inspire our imagination. They also give us a perspective on the world that we inhabit. So I think those stories are very important. Then the stories can be categorized in different forms. There's fiction, non-fiction. As journalists, I think what we are is basically we're chroniclers of history. We put things together for posterity to see who we were and what we were about. That is one role that we play, and I think it's a very essential role because human beings are more than the sum of their parts. We build very complex systems around us, and we need a medium to understand how those systems are working. The second role, of course, and a very important one that we play and we hope to play, is to keep a check on whether these systems are working in a fair and free manner. There's a reason why the press is called the fourth pillar of democracy. A free press is fundamental to the working of a democracy. And you and I think, are cogs in that wheel. And we try to do our bit and tell our stories and put the world in perspective for our viewers. So I think that's what I would tell an alien, that this world runs on more than fuel, on more than air and water. It also runs on stories, and we are the ones who are telling those stories.
Okay. No, I think I really love that, that we are chroniclers of history and we tells, and the world runs on stories. But maybe let me make this a little harder for you now. So if, stories have existed and, the world has run on stories long before formal journalism existed, right? Even if we think of the ancient times, we know that in communities, we told stories to each other. And in many ways, a lot of those stories are what we call as news. So why do we need formal journalism in this process of storytelling? Like,
because the stories that we're talking about in the past were from the point of view of the stories that your king wanted, I'm assuming, would be the ones that would be disseminated, and that is also called propaganda now in today's world. But today we live in democracies and nation states, and we have space for opinions of various shades. And as journalists, we try to incorporate all of it, mostly to things that we agree with, but also the ones that we don't agree with. And if that's happening, it's news, and if it's news, that needs to be told. So I think over the years, like we've evolved formal structures for most things in the world. There is a formal structure that has come to be associated with journalism too, although I would say that internet has disrupted it in a big way. And today, everyone with a cell phone thinks of himself or herself as a journalist. Everyone who has tweeted thinks of themselves as a blogger, which is absolutely fine. The more the merrier, I say. But I think in the traditional field of journalism, we still follow some rules. We still believe in fact checking. We still believe in trying to present facts as they are and not be carried too much by rhetoric or emotion. And I think those things are very important, which is where the question of, and I'm assuming it'll come later, the question of credibility comes. So there are enough and more sources of information today, but why do people watch or read a particular journalist or a particular publication or channel and not another? Because there are way too many stories. There's a glut of stories. It's about picking which ones you believe in, which ones you think are coming from credible sources. So that is why we need a formal structure, we need rules, we need regulations, because at the end of the day, we're also humans and we also tend to have our biases that may reflect ways.
No, perfect. I think you basically answered my next question, which was precisely about rules. So this is great. But I think since you've already touched on credibility, maybe let's hear your take on what exactly credibility is. And why I'm asking this is because, at a baseline, all of us hear that, okay, the news needs to be credible. That is one of the most important features of news or of quality news. But how would Palki define credibility?
We know the dictionary definition of credibility, of course. But I think there's something else that I also want to address here through this question. That when you talk, and because I've been a TV journalist for the better part of my career, I can talk more about the TV audience. And people tend to speak of news channels today and say, oh, the older days were so much better. News was simpler and you got both versions. But in the older days, we were only getting TV news from a government-run channel, right? The format may have been different, but only the news that they wanted us to know was reaching us, at least in TV. In newspapers, of course, there were all kinds of publications. So when there has been a glut of, today we have 100 odd news channels in India, many more across the world. So people are spoiled for choice. Then you have social media where everyone's getting information. So I believe that today people come to news channels not so much for information as for validation. If they've read something somewhere, they want to go and see. There was a time when the BBC commanded this respect. It has long lost that. But back in the day, I think when Indira Gandhi was killed, people waited for the BBC to say it, to actually believe that this has happened. I think that is credibility. When you have the trust of your audience to a point where they may have heard it from different sources, but they'll come back to you to check what you've said, both in terms of facts and opinion that you dish out. I think that is credibility, to be able to, and a manifestation of that is your continued audience. If they're coming back to you day after day, that means they trust what you're saying and they value your point of view as well as the information that you're bringing to them. That is how I would define credibility.
No, I think credibility and trust, even, to people like me who study the media for the living. And, it's much easier for scholars like us to, define thousand things in 1,000 different ways. But you're absolutely right. I think trust and credibility are quite intertwined, and it's very hard to actually disentangle the two. But let's continue a little more on this question of trust. So, today, as you've just said, that, everybody who tweets, they think that they are a blogger. Everybody who can make a reel on a cell phone and, start telling stories thinks they are a journalist. So given the multiple ways in which we are receiving news, the multiple people or sources that we are receiving them from, and the multiple types of organizations that are involved, like you could think of, for example, YouTube as a news source, or you could think of, NDTV's channel, just as an example, on YouTube as a news source. Or you could think of Times of India as a news source. You could think of TikTok as a news source, or you could even think of an individual YouTuber who analyzes the news and does news commentary as a news source. So given this multiplicity of, platforms, sources, channels, outlets, what exactly do people trust? Do they trust the journalists? Do they trust outlets? Do they trust platforms? Like when we say that someone trusts the news and comes back to this source, what type of source are people trusting?
I wish I knew. You're the one who's studying consumer behavior, so maybe you can tell me. I would want to know what is it that people trust. I think people trust individuals. It's the easiest. I mean, even in storytelling, when we tell a story, we always say that pick a face and tell a story because faces are most relatable. Then, of course, organizations. There are organizations that are known for credible journalism. So if it's coming from those sources, then you know that there has to be some basis to this. So that's very much there. Um, and when I say that everyone who's a lot of people who've written tweet think of themselves, I'm not saying it in a derogatory manner.
No,
I'm
no,
saying
absolutely.
that a lot of people want to be part of this process of storytelling and think that they can do it. And I think these social media platforms have really democratized news dissemination. It has reached the last mile, and everyone can make themselves heard. But of the millions of YouTube channels that exist, only a few command a very big following. And that is testimony to the fact that they're credible sources of information, or they're interesting, or they're doing something that others are not doing, which is why they're getting a repeat audience. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely fair. That I think it's, even as someone who has tried to, using very social scientific methods, tried to disentangle what exactly is trusted more, the outlets or the individual. It's very hard to tell. This is always it's a sum of parts, that's bigger than it's the whole is bigger than the sum of individual parts. So this is obviously very difficult, but I think I'll give it to you that I think individual journalists, when they move from outlet to outlet, they take a lot of their followers with them. So obviously people trust individuals, but I think I don't know if you saw this recently. There's a tweet going around in a lot of American journalism circles, or I would say Western journalism circles, that the Weather Channel is the most trusted source of news in the US right now. So, clearly it seems that, outlets that produce more innocuous content are more trusted than outlets that, produce content that's more consequential. But I think related to trust and credibility, let's touch on this one question of objectivity. Because, no conversation about journalism can be complete without talking about objectivity. We all think that news should be objective. News should be neutral, or news should have multiple perspectives. So what is objectivity according to you? I'm sure if I do a poll of the people who are listening to us and ask each of them what is objectivity, everybody will have a slightly different answer, So it would be great to know your take on what is objectivity.
I think objectivity is not neutrality.
Okay.
I think you can be objective and yet not be neutral. If you see Russia as an aggressor in Ukraine, then you're not being a neutral party, but you're being objective to the extent that you're basing your argument on facts. I think to me that is objectivity. To be able to make an argument on the basis of facts, whether or not it agrees with, and we inhabit a world where there are ecosystems and where there are agendas at play, and multiple agendas, and sometimes a lot of people don't realize that they become tools to foster certain agendas. I think objectivity stems from again, I repeat, from facts, from putting it out on the table that this is what has happened. And I will take it a little forward. I mean, the kind of show that I do is not necessarily a news show, it's an opinion show. I'm giving an analysis, but I'm being honest because I'm telling the viewer where I come from, and this is what I believe in. So they know, if they don't agree with me, they know that this is where I stand on such and such subject. And what I'm saying is a how should I put it? It stems from my position on a subject. I think that's a fair conversation. That's an honest conversation that I have with my viewer. But again, I say that neutrality, I think, is also a little overrated. I mean, as news media, when outlets wrote about British imperialism, were they being neutral? We've always taken a side as journalists. And this whole concept of both sidism is, I think, sometimes it's overrated and counterproductive. So I believe that if you believe in a cause, and I think this is a very hard conversation. Ever since I started as a journalist, we've always had these things going on in the newsroom. That at what point do you stop becoming a journalist, and when do you become an activist? Where do you draw the line? When you take up the cause of a rape victim, then how far are you prepared to go? Or will you give the benefit of doubt to the person who's being accused, while the facts of the case clearly state that he may be the wrong party? So it's not a black and white sort of a concept. If I've confused you, the audience,
no, I think
that's how it is. These are challenges that we face every day. These are conversations that we have every day as we sit together to put our stories together. That are we being objective? Do we have to be neutral? Must we give the other point of view? Or is that going to really not help a story and not bring out the truth as we see it? So this is very complex. I think it evolves over the years. Your own strategy, your own ability to spot the red flags and to say that this is how I want to construct my story or my argument.
No, I think a lot of journalism scholars would agree with you that equating objectivity with neutrality is not as clean and cut and clear as some people think. But so there's a very interesting related concept related to this, which some of us call as false equivalence. And one example is, let's say, in the US, for a long time, coverage about climate change. So there is obviously a large group of people, including scientists who have studied climate change for decades, who believe in climate change and think that we should do something about it. But then there is a small, somewhat fringe community, or rather, I would say several fringe communities that deny climate change. And US journalism has often been accused of giving equivalent coverage to both, people who study climate change and are concerned about it, and those who deny climate change. So I think many times in our bid to be objective, we tend to create this false equivalence where we give equivalent weight to both sides of an issue. And all the examples that you talked about, for example, the rape victim example, that would you give equivalent coverage to someone who is accused of a heinous crime? Probably not. I mean, have you encountered in your day-to-day reporting this idea of to what extent do I balance this conundrum where I must give the benefit of doubt to the other side, but I need to bring the most important issues and give them most weightage?
As an individual, I've not bothered with balance for a very long time.
Okay.
But you operate in systems that appreciate certain things. So yes, there was a time when you did sort of do this. You play one bite of one party and you play another one. But I don't think that if it's a court case, then you say that this is, of course, the matter is still sub judice. But if it's and the subjects that I deal with, for instance, if I'm talking about what's happening in South China Sea, while I will play out China's version, I will also call it out because I see China as an aggressor. So I'm not going to bother myself by saying that, okay, I should give equal weightage. There are 5 other countries that claim areas in South China Sea, and they have legit claims. So I feel no reason why I should, through my reportage, defend the Chinese point of view in any way while I give the other side, or give it a platform. That's just one example I'm giving you. Or, for instance, what happened in Ethiopia last year, the Tigray fighting. Both sides have a compelling claim, but then you have to say that this is a president who won the Nobel Peace Prize of all prizes, and now he is giving his army a carte blanche to go and the kind of atrocities that were perpetrated on the people of Tigray. In situations like these, which are very many, unfortunately, in our world, I don't think it serves the kind of journalism that I want to do. It does not serve the purpose that I bother with the idea of balance. There is no balance. There is an aggressor. There is a party that is very obviously in the wrong and needs to be called out. So that's the kind of thing I do.
Yeah. So just to play the devil here for a little longer, many would say, but this is precisely what makes the news biased when it should not be. So would you say that are people missing some nuance here? Like if seeing a journalist clearly take a side makes them think that this is what is making the news biased and not objective, how would you address that?
I think I firmly believe that the viewers are very smart. They know exactly who stands where on what issue if they watch too enough. And they know what to discount. And they do that all the time. And a lot of people write to me almost on a daily basis saying, I don't agree with what you've said here, but I like what you do. And I think that's a healthy relationship to have with your audience, that you don't have to agree with everything, but you keep coming back to me just to see what I'm saying on such and such subject. Yes, taking one side can be called bias, but I'll take it further and say that we have our biases, and I will wear my biases on my sleeve, and I'll say, this is what we're doing. And this is very different because I do an opinion show, so I can say all of these things. But if a reporter goes to cover, say, a riot, right? So they have to show what's happening. That's a completely different story. At the same time, I would say that they have to show what is not obvious. So there are stories within stories. We as human beings tend to get swayed by what's happening now and what's happening around us. And especially in TV, because you're feeding a very hungry machine, you're always giving inputs. Sometimes the layers of the story are missed. And that is, in the name of not being biased, you're quickly trying to put together. I don't know if I'm being able to explain this to you, but bias can be or lack of trying to achieve a lack of bias can be a handicap sometimes.
Yeah, no, I think I completely understand where you are coming from, but maybe since you started talking about viewers, let's bring a related question about viewers. So to the extent that you have access to viewer feedback, and I know news organizations they're trying to do a good job of bringing feedback to reporters and to journalists and to anchors. They should be doing a better job. And this is very close to what I study. I study audiences for the news. But do you think to what extent do the millions of people who follow you and tune in to your programs every day, how many of them really understand that what you do is an opinion show and not a traditional news show? Again, I don't want numbers, but just your perception, you know.
I think the viewers don't really make that distinction, Harsh. They are looking at content. You know, they're all scrolling through their phones, and one moment they're watching, I don't know, a reel that shows a Bollywood actress walking into an airport. The next moment, they're watching a clip of how to make healthy breakfast in 5 minutes. And then maybe a new clip appears on their screen and they watch it too. So they're really not thinking that ये news है, ये opinion है, ये documentary है, ये cookery show. It's not how they process content. We think of it like that. You know, when we make our plan and our FPC, we think of it as a sports show, an entertainment show, business show, a news show, international affairs. For the viewer, unless it's a very, and that's a very small number, I'm assuming, of viewers who are very focused on a particular type of content or news and want to watch some sort of niche segment. But for the larger mass, we are just content creators. Some of them are seen as journalists, some of them are seen as entertainers, some others are seen as bloggers, vloggers, YouTubers, you name it. So today, people who are not traditional journalists are also doing stories explaining international affairs. And you can't take it away from them. They have millions of viewers. So is the viewer going to them thinking that this is a news podcast or a news video blog? They're just going for content. So I don't think that they make that distinction. Having said that, they do understand when you're expressing opinion and when you're giving facts.
Oh, okay. No, that's
so I'm a very evolved audience. I can't speak for all markets, but I believe that the Indian audiences, I mean, if you go to a neighborhood tea stall, you will see people having a heated discussion on who has better chances of winning Karnataka and how it may have a bearing or not on the national election. And sometimes it surprises you the kind of inputs they come up with. So I think in societies like ours in India, we have a very evolved audience that understands content very well, may not make that distinction necessarily, but knows when to discount, what to discount.
Okay, no, I think that's perfect. I think, is that what Amartya Sen had said long ago, right? That one Indian is a monologue, two Indians is a debate, and three Indians is one political party. In that, you know, argumentative Indian, it's a slightly dated text, but one of his most famous. So, you know, speaking of the audience being evolved, but the audience also being incredibly distracted by lots of information, let's turn to this issue of, you know, misinformation and fake news. You may have heard this, that, you know, WHO, for example, called COVID-19 a crisis of, you know, public health, but also a crisis of misinformation. You know, I think they use the term pandemic and infodemic, that alongside the virus, we are also dealing with, you know, this virus of misinformation or virus of bad information. So how much sleep do you lose over this as a journalist, you know, who's clearly a good actor in this equation?
I think the WHO can take some of the blame for the information pandemic that they unleashed on the world, initially saying that there's nothing to it, and then slowly coming around to saying that there may be something coming out of China, but that's probably a story for another day. Fake news is a huge source of concern for everyone involved in the information business, simply because it's very hard to verify. And while we are still developing systems, the amount of information, video, photo is so vast. And you have technology that makes impersonation easy. You have technology that will put words in the mouth of an individual who may not even have spoken. For example, recently there was this clip of Bill Gates that was going viral. It came to me from different sources, and people actually believed it. So the ones that I know and who've sent it to me on WhatsApp, I can tell them that this is fake. But imagine the millions of people it has gone to, because it says forwarded many times. That is where credibility comes in. So while people may have watched it, some of my acquaintances at least wrote to me saying, "Is this true? And have you done a story on this?" So that gives me hope that as journalists, then we have to to raise our level and to scrutinize ourselves better and check our facts repeatedly before putting out information, and where possible also call out fake news, because it's very easy to fall for it. We are also, it's very easy for others to think why we can't do it. On any given day, you have hundreds of stories coming into your news feed. You have to pick some of them. You have to put them out as fast as possible. If newspapers were limiting your time to create something more than magazines, TV came and then you had to push things out within minutes. And now you have digital media where you have to do it as you speak. Otherwise, Google will pick up someone else. That's how the algorithm works. And so your searchability will reduce. See, it's a race against time where you have to maintain accuracy. It is a tightrope walk for most journalists. And so I want to use this platform to defend what a lot of my colleagues in this organization and elsewhere are doing. It's not an easy job. It's not easy to be experts of everything. You cannot have specialized individuals for various subjects and beats, because there are costs to it. So we multitask and we try to do the best that we can. In most cases, it does not come because of an agenda. We are bringing you the story that we think we have cross-checked. Sometimes we get it wrong. When we get it wrong, the best thing to do is to tell our audience later, as soon as we figure out that this was wrong, and we apologize. I think credibility is very important and a good counter to fake news. Until we have policy solutions, until we have tech solutions, fake news, I think, remains a huge, huge challenge for all of us, not just the journalists, but also the audiences.
No, I think one thing that stood out for me in your answer is that you are advocating for journalists to call out on fake news when they can, because as an academic who study people, and a lot more scholars of media actually study people than they study newsrooms. And one solution that we have been debating for almost a decade now is improving media literacy. This idea that if we teach people to recognize credible sources from non-credible sources, then to some extent we'll be able to address the problem of misinformation. Now, increasingly we are finding that works well in hypothetical studies, when we create small experiments, try to see if people can tell a credible source from a non-credible source, but in real world it fails. So going by your solution, do you think it's worthwhile for especially large newsrooms that have some resources to actually create dedicated desks that can provide journalists certain specific stories of misinformation that are circulating among the community that is most relevant to those newsrooms, and do this on a regular, systematic basis? Like, would that over time teach people how to tell fake sources from credible sources?
I think a lot of newsrooms are trying to do that. And a lot of agencies are also trying to do that, but it's still work in progress, and it's still early days, because we are all also still grasping the full impact of this misinformation pandemic, as you called it, and how it impacts us, and in how many ways, how pervasive it is. So we are also you have to realize that at least journalists of my generation, we're not digital natives. We have grown with technology and we have adopted technology. So for some of us, it's even harder to spot or to cross-check. I mean, I have a team of very young, very bright people who I think are much more talented than me, because they can very quickly tell me that this is how it is going, and this is where you'll find the right visual, and this is where you'll find the data, because they know exactly how to use the systems, how to use the technology at their disposal. So I think that also plays a big part. But increasingly, newsrooms are cognizant of the challenge that they face, and for want of a better word, an opportunity also to create content that can make real change and inform the audience about what is not right.
No, I think that's absolutely right. So let's switch gears from one bad news to what I call as another, moment of crisis for journalism. And it's in fact a little unfortunate that this is happening at the same time as the whole fake news crisis is growing in proportions that we couldn't have imagined a decade ago. Is the basic economic model. So, if I put it very simply, as journalism has moved from, print and traditional electronic media like television and radio to digital, the advertising dollars have not moved in the same proportion. So we've seen this in the West where the digital turn is a little ahead of India, but we are also seeing it in India that basically people are not willing to pay for news online, and advertisers are not willing to pay the same amounts that they used to pay on traditional media to, advertise on news outlets. So how does journalism deal with this crisis? Can it deal with this crisis? Now, I know you worry less about this than, your colleagues on the business side of the newsroom, but I'm sure you've thought about this, or, you have some opinions about this. So we would really love to hear your perspective on the economic crisis that is facing journalism with the digital.
It is, in fact, one of my favorite subjects because it impacts all of us directly. I think people don't pay for news, period. They don't want to pay for news. They don't want to pay for newspapers. They don't want to pay for the newspaper generation is also a generation that is soon fading. I mean, today a 30-year-old is typically not reading your hard copy of a newspaper. They're probably reading it online and only when it's free. So people expect the works from journalists, but do not understand that content creation, whether in text or photo or video, takes a lot of resource investment. And that is a huge problem. You will pay 500 bucks or however much you pay for a Netflix subscription, but you will not pay 5 rupees for a news channel subscription. And yet you expect the media to do their job diligently and honestly and in an unbiased manner and do their duty. How does that happen? Having said that, I think our business model is fundamentally flawed given the reality of the world today, and we need to push it. I think some organizations are already trying to do that, putting things behind a paywall. You will see a dip in viewership, in readership, but if your content is compelling, they will come around. It will happen. As far as the advertiser is concerned, I think the advertiser does not bother with news beyond a point because the numbers are, if you look at entertainment and news, there's a world of difference in the numbers. So typically a news advertiser does not even care for good content, honestly. They just want their Excel sheet and they want to look at the numbers. Okay, these are the top 3 players. Let's divide my little $5 that I have between these 3. And it doesn't matter what you're doing. Unless there is a backlash, unless somebody says that this is a hate campaign and why are you supporting it, then they sort of tend to wake up because they don't want any impact on their business. And I'm doing some plain speaking here. But the advertisers are not bothered. It is not their job to run our business. It's our job to run our business. And we have depended on ad revenue for way too long to run our newsrooms. And the result is this, that the best talent is leaving. While in all other industries, especially in the creative industries, the tech-related industries, and I see media as much as a creative business as a technology business because we are driven by technology, the salaries have gone up. The kind of work environment that you get has improved substantially in the past couple of decades. But while media has seen so much disruption in terms of the numbers of players that are there and the kind of reach that we get because of technology, we've not seen a real investment in people. And while AI is great, machines are great, I would say every newsroom has more or less the same cameras, the same lights, the same computer systems, the same edit machines. Then why is it that one show does better than other? Because it's the people who make it different. I think newsroom leaders need to recognize that you need to invest in your people. If you don't do that, no one else will. And I think while the viewer has the right to demand the best content from news portals, They must also know that news at the end of the day is also a business. We have salaries to pay, people have EMIs. How will they get that money if no one is willing to pay? It's a very emotional answer, but this is something that really bothers me. Everything, you fake news, all of these are crises. We will tide over them, but this is the fundamental crisis. The people who make newsrooms are not being looked after, and that needs to change. Otherwise, the quality of content is only going to dip further.
No, I think this is a crisis that I, as a scholar of media, also worry about a lot. As much as it gives us, material to write interesting papers and, do interesting analysis. But for democracy, it's a real crisis. But so, you said that we've relied on advertisers for far too long. So that was actually going to be my next question, that what do you think of some alternative models to both subscription and advertising? I mean, traditionally we've thought of, advertising as one model, subscription as another model. But what about, let's say, public funding of news, like the BBC domestic in the UK? Or what about non-profit news organizations? If you have some philanthropic foundations that could, invest in news, like, have you thought of these models, and do you think they are viable at all?
It's a very, from where I'm sitting, sounds like a very utopian concept. I don't think anyone invests without an agenda. I'm not saying it has to be a political agenda only. It can be something as harmless as, if I'm paying the money, then how about featuring 2 of my interviews on the show or on your channel, or saying good things about my business or the charity work that I'm doing. I mean, there has to be some trade-off. No one pays money just like that. Crowdfunding, public funding may work to a point, but I'm not sure how sustainable and dependable a model it is. At the end of the day, you need a steady stream of revenue. You need that runway where you see that you can pay salaries for the next XYZ months. You need that kitty to be able to invest and expand, to be able to gather information and news. Doing original stories is an expensive proposition. Why do you think so many people are just looking at each other's stories and rewriting them and putting them out? Where is the original reporting? It is diminishing. The number of reporters is going down. People are talking about having AI tools to fill in, to write content, which is fine. Technology will take its course and we will all have to adapt. But I'm saying that the investment that needs to be there in creating good news content is increasingly going down. I'll tell you an interesting anecdote. And because this is a subject that is so close to my heart, I keep talking to people about it on news investment and so on and so forth. And a venture capitalist told me that today I'm more likely to invest money on a pet food store than a news content portal. And that is the unfortunate reality of the industry that we are a part of. Expectations are sky high, but money is always in short supply.
Okay. I mean, are there particular genres of news that you think people have more of an appetite to pay for? For example, I don't know, sports news or, international news. I mean, that's the genre that you are an expert on. So, because what I'm getting here is that to make news viable, we need to somehow create higher quality content for which people are willing to pay. But even that, I would, argue with you, is not a model that's very scalable. It may be sustainable but on a small scale, So how do we achieve the scale that is needed to make that viable?
I wish I had the answer, but I would only say that we need to diversify our sources of revenue and de-risk ourselves from advertisers and their whims and fancies on what works and what doesn't work. I think we need to have multiple sources of revenue, and we need to sensitize the viewer. If we can sensitize the viewer on climate change, on on the pandemic, on why it's important to be vaccinated. Why have we not taken up the challenge to tell them that for free and fair news, uh, they need to invest, and it's in their interest to invest in good content because it will directly impact their life. We need to take this up urgently as media houses, and I'm guilty of that too. While I talk about it a lot, I'm not sort of, once in a while I do stories on why people should pay for news, otherwise they will only get paid news. Uh, uh, but uh, but I think a lot more can be done in this direction.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very hopeful stance, and I think we all should, remain optimistic. Without that, we'll really not solve. So, no conversation with Palki can be complete if we don't specifically talk about international news. And maybe, we'll go a little more, biographical here, so, or autobiographical. So, how did you decide that this genre was your calling?
Uh, I don't know. I think I was watching a lot of international news in college, and I found it interesting. Um, I
Mhm.
also think that it gave me a sort of a window to the world, um, to explore the world while I was sitting in one tier two city in India. I could sort of see what's happening across the world. It opened many avenues. Um, and it helped because it also over the years when I visited the places that I had only seen in news, I realized the gap in our representation of a place and what it actually can be. So I think I just liked the idea of exploring what was happening across the world. But that is not to say that I've always only done this. While I was part of the international desk from the
Mhm.
very beginning, I have, as an anchor, covered a lot of national news stories and for years on end. But I think my heart always remained with geopolitics. That's just something that I liked,
Mhm.
and I got a chance to build on it. So I count myself as one of the lucky few because we may like a lot of things, but we don't often get a chance to do it. So one thing
So,
led to the other, and I doing it.
yeah, no, that's great to hear and also fascinating because so what do you do to make sure that people, remain interested in news that is not only about their own country? Because, a lot of my research over the years has suggested that actually the audience, not just in India, but actually the audience for content that is not from their own region in any country is actually very, very low. In other words, people generally are less interested in international news than they are in domestic news. So how do you make international news more relevant,
So one
Because
thing is that,
normatively, it's go
yeah,
ahead.
no, you finish your point.
Oh no, I think your camera is frozen. That's why I was not able to
Oh.
tell. So yeah, so basically, normatively, it's of course it's a great thing if we can get more people to be interested in news that's not just about India, for example, but about the world. But how do we do that?
So there are two parts to my answer here. One part is that if you tell a story well, no matter what the story is, it'll fly. It a lot depends on how you're telling it. Um that is one. The second is that when I made the complete switch to international news, I think it happened at just the right time because the world is changing and India is changing. And today's India is more confident about its place in the world and not shy of expressing its opinion on something that may be happening, say, in Ghana or Nicaragua or any part of the world. Um, so that self confidence also manifests itself in curiosity about what's happening in the world. There is a growing audience in tier two, tier three cities that is interested in global affairs, that wants to know what's happening and how it will impact. Because a lot of our young people see themselves as cosmopolitan individuals. The English speaking audience, especially, tends to have relatives, children studying outside, relatives in some part of the world, probably holiday makers who may be planning their next trip to Bali or I don't know where. So they are curious about how the world around them is turning. And that lends to a lot of interest in international affairs. Uh, but interestingly, less than 40% of my audience is in India. The rest is outside India. And that also gives me a lot of hope that the rest of the world is interested in India's point of view, because India is becoming a very credible player on the global stage. We are leading the G20 this year, we are leading the SCO this year. So people the world over want to know what India thinks of a particular subject. Will India condemn Russia's war on Ukraine? What will India say about the king's coronation? There is genuine interest. And I think it helps that we found ourselves at the right place at the right time to be able to tell those stories for the audience in India that's interested in the world outside and for the world that is interested in India's opinion. We sort of are acting as a bridge. And the numbers are only growing. So it's good for us, I say.
Yeah, no, I think that's great to hear. So, maybe I'm going to take one or two questions from the audience. And somebody here has asked something which actually I am also very curious to hear about, So Mr. Sandeep Bhattacharya is asking, why do so many journalists revel in reporting bad news? I think this is something that a lot of people think that, journalists like to tell bad news. It's probably a myth, but people cannot be faulted for thinking like that. So it would be great to hear from you.
Since you're leading a journalism school, one of the things that we're taught is that dog eats man is not news, but man eats dog is news. So anything that's happening that is contrary to the general flow of things tends to make news. I read a very interesting concept sometime back, Harsh, and I would like to share it with you and the other participants. Someone said that if you're launching a new product in the market, try to define your product. In our case, try to define your news story. Is it a multivitamin or a painkiller? If it's a multivitamin, then people may take it for 5 days, then not take it for 5 other days, then say, maybe I was traveling, I forgot to have it before breakfast. It's optional. But if it's a painkiller, you'll find a way to take it. You will go out of your way, go to the medical store at night if needed, but you will take it to alleviate that pain. So a lot of times, to increase the sellability of a story, journalists tend to turn it into a painkiller. It is not just some information about what's happening in the world, but if you don't pay attention to this, maybe the next catastrophe will strike you. That's the tone and tenor of what is said. So that's not the best strategy, I would say, because you may fall for it once or twice, but the third time you'll know that this is exaggeration. So it doesn't always work. Not all journalists revel in telling negative news, but I think this is where it stems from, that you want people's attention and you want it now. So you say something that is dramatic or scary to sort of get that attention and then go on and tell the story. It's our clickbait.
Okay. So I think, now we had you only till 9:30 and, we've gone over time. So, I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope, you did too. And it was probably a break from, talking about content, because I know whenever journalists are interviewed, people tend to always ask them about आपने ये story ऐसे क्यों cover की, आप इसके बारे में ऐसे क्यों बोलते हैं? It's all about content and bias and reporting specifics. But here we were trying to talk more about, the context. Now, since this is for a journalism school, maybe very quickly, if you would just have any last words of advice for people who are considering studying journalism, and we'll let you go after that, I promise.
Okay, sure. Those who want to be journalists should know that this is like a bit like Hotel California. You can enter, but you can't leave, because it then becomes a project of passion. And all the challenges that you and I enumerated remain. But despite those challenges, you see some fabulous people around you churning out stories day after day because they love their job. You cannot be a journalist if you think of it as a job. You can only be a journalist if you live, breathe, think those stories all the time. We don't have work shifts. Every time we are talking to an individual, when we are buying a loaf of bread, when we are driving to work, we are again chronicling human stories, emotions, reactions to what's happening around them. It's a full-time job, and it's a very fulfilling job if you do it well. It is, like I said, a passion project. My second piece of advice is that if you want to do it well, read like your life depends on it. Not enough people read good books these days, and that shows in the depth or the lack of it in their commentary and conversations. It's very important to read to understand our world, and try to read good books. I think if we think of these two things, we should be in a good place.
Perfect. So, I think that's very good advice to turn this moment of crisis into, an opportunity. And I hope, that we as journalism educators are able to also, do that to give you the kind of people who you would enjoy working with and grooming further in the newsroom. So on that note, I think I would like to thank everybody for, showing up. Palki, thank you so much again. Thank you to all of you who asked questions. I do believe that we were able to take a lot of the type of questions that were coming in the conversation. It's obviously not possible for me to, be objective in any manner and try to, take all questions or a representative slice of all questions here. So thank you so much. And I'll turn it over to Harshita to, tell us what to do next.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Palki.
Yeah, thank you so much. So we are actually towards the end of the session, and I would like to thank Ms. Palki for taking out time from her busy schedule for today's session and conducting such a pertinent and stimulating talk. I'm sure the insights that you shared today will be found valuable by the audience members. I would also like to thank Dr. Harsh for moderating the session today in such an engaging and effective way and bringing your scholarly inputs in today's conversation. So to the audience members, before we close, I would again like to add that, Jio Institute is launching a postgraduate program in journalism this year, and the admissions of this program are currently ongoing. The last date to apply is May 30th. If you or anyone in your network would like to explore this unique program, do check out our website at www.jioinstitute.edu.in, wherein you can look at the website or call at the helpline number for any further details. With that, I would like to close today's session. Thank you, everyone, and have a nice evening ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.